Hey everybody, welcome back. We're making great progress here at the Red Barn on the Ferrari Swap 914. And in this episode, I start thinking about how I'm going to mount the ECU, where it's going to go, how I'm going to run the wires. And I only want to put the intake system together one time, so I got to start thinking about finishes and how I want that to turn out. And then from a background music perspective, I'm kind of feeling in a ska mood. I hope you enjoy. All right, now that we're getting ready to get this thing running, I don't want to, use all new gaskets and everything and work all this stuff up like I did with the LS car, and then kind of not worry about what it looks like and end up having to replace stuff twice just to do the cleanup. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the whole intake plenum, and what that means is when we welded on the turn downs for the throttle bodies. This is going to get, I think we're going to try JB Weld in here as a sort of a metal bondo kind of a deal to get these junctions to be smooth. I'm going to leave these welded because they look okay, but I want to smooth this and then it'll all get wrinkle finished red again with the Ferrari logos completely scuffed smooth. So I've got to go ahead and just do some tidying up. I've got a, just a sort of a porting tool, die grinder bit on the air tool, and I'm just smoothing out as best I can, removing all the high spots before we try to smooth finish these things. And there's a couple sections on the inside where you can see we welded them on, Martin welded them on the inside. So I'm just going to tidy up some of those weld seams as best I can, and then get this thing set to get it powder coated, or, well, I don't know, powder coated. It's got to be wrinkle finish, so I think you can powder coat wrinkle, but we'll see. I'll worry about that when I get there. All right, that's all done. I knocked down just a couple of high spots around the turn downs, but then I also tidied up around all of the welds on the inside of this. We built up a little bit of material here to support this, and so I wouldn't call it porting it, but cleaned up the welds, any bleed through when these little retaining rings got put on. So this thing's all done. We're ready for some filler and final finish work on that. And then I couldn't help it, and I just took a little Scotch-Brite to the Ferrari logo, and it shines right up. It looks great. So I can't wait to see this thing all the way done. Well, it's not pretty, but it's getting molded to where it needs to be. There was low spots at the tops, and so I just kind of over bondoed it, and now it'll just be, wait till it cures, and then we'll shape it. And sorry about this horrible display. The place is a mess. What in the world is that contraption? I will tell you all about that in a future episode. Teaser, but the JB Weld worked out pretty good. I started going after this with a DA, 80 grit on a DA, and it smoothed it nicely. I unfortunately don't have the right kind of implements for getting down into these tighter areas, so I either have to borrow something from Martin, buy something, or convince him to help me with this part. But I think this is going to work out just fine. So excited about that. That's going to be, and then once that's all tidied up and smooth, off to the powder coaters for some wrinkle finish, and that is going to be epically cool. Look how good that Ferrari looks. Even with the crappy finish, it looks great, saying Ferrari. So happy with that, making good progress. All right, well, after trying the ECU up in the footwell on that bracket, I decided I didn't like it. It was impeding on footroom, and I didn't want it. It's not going to fit behind the seat. I don't want to cut up the firewall. It can't sit behind the seat. It can't sit under the seat because the seats come down at an angle. It just doesn't work. And I play with a bunch of different locations, and what I've decided is I'm going to put it right where I put my LS one, which is right in front of the passenger seat. But what I want to do is I want to get it as far back in the car this way as I can. And there's a bunch of wiring on this thing. There's these, there's 5 plugs in here, etc. So, long story short, what I'm going to do is I am going to abbreviate this cross brace, and I'm going to cut it about a 45 here, take it across and here, and that allows me to do a couple things. One, I got to open up some holes in the back. I did the same thing in the LS car. Here's a picture of how I did it. I did it by flattening some tubes and shoving them in there. I'm going to do this one a little differently because, as I said, I want to narrow this up and move the ECU back. So what I did is I took a piece of 1x2. This is what, 095 wall, so this is pretty strong. And I opened up some holes in it, and where it's going to sit, look, I have to maintain this. So it's going to sit about like this. And this pass-through will be for the 425 amp plug. And then this pass-through will be able to support these 4 plugs with this pushed over here. Now, I'm going to end up probably notching this a little bit so I can run these big battery power cables over, you know, up into the factory wire channel. And yes, you may have noticed that I've moved the brake lines and the fuel line. I'm going to redo those, and I am going to run them inside the tunnel. I figured out a way to do that I think will work and be easy to service. So it's going to tidy up the interior. But so what I did here, as you can see, is I drilled an 1 3/4 hole, and I put an 1 3/4 piece of 1 3/4 DOM roll cage tubing in there to give it strength, that strength back. And on this one, what I did was I took another piece of 1 3/4 DOM, sliced it in half, made 2 ends, got a piece of 1-inch strap, and made myself a little oval that, with a little persuasion, what that's going to do is recreate the, you know, it more than recreates the wall thickness, and so I can get my 4 plugs through here no problem, and this will replace that that cross brace in the floor. So I'm going to go ahead and just weld these in and finish this, you know, dress this a little bit, and then I will have my replacement crossbar. All right, I didn't bother filming this. It's just cutting and grinding and noisy and messy. But what I've got is the finished welded piece. And I dressed the welds just a little bit, not all the way. And then I notched out, leaving an inch, a little over an inch of this upper section. And I've just positioned this approximately where it's going to sit. And what's nice about this is this 1x2 now drops down in here and then slides right back against the rear wall of that cross member. And then what I did is I just positioned it where I wanted it, and then traced with a Sharpie in there, got out a little body saw and my sanding drums, and you can see the result. I've got a nice little matchy-match opening, and you know, you can see how the wires are going to get through there now. So what I'll do is I'll plug weld, you know, drill a couple holes here, I'll plug weld this here, plug weld it along the top, plug weld it down here, and then I just have to decide how I want to close off these things, if I'm going to open it up at a 45 or just make it square. I don't know yet. You know, you can see that's essentially just a fine shot at that wire. This one's going to be fine. Whoops, this one's going to be fine too. There's a little bit of slack in the wires right as they get out of the body of the connector, and I can scoot it over a little bit more that way. I absolutely will have to do a trough there. You can see this battery cable's way too low relative to that. So I'll just open up a little trough so I can sneak both these power cables up into there, and we should be good to go. Okay, I played with the wiring harness a little bit last night, started taking stuff apart just to get some organizing, and I pulled the grommet off so I could, you know, I'm not going to need that, and makes things a little more flexible. But now you can see what I was up to. I just taped this thing in here to protect the sharp edges, you know, to make sure wires don't get sliced, etc. But this gives you an idea of what's what. So I can actually, this worked out great. I can actually scoot this thing back even farther. It's sitting a little high. It's on 1/2-inch spacers, and it doesn't need to be that high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make like a suspension mount, if you will. I'm going to make another aluminum bracket that this lives on, and then when it gets outboard of the ECU, it'll step up and then step out, and then the isolators can be there, so I can lower this I don't know, probably 1/4 of an inch, because it makes a difference. When you look back here, 1/4 of an inch will make this thing sit down. It'll get these battery posts even lower, which is all good. Ideally, I could get everything to be under this surface here. I don't know if I'll be able to make that happen, because then I could just make something that came right off of here, maybe right off the tunnel as part of the cover to be a nice supportive system. So if anybody accidentally got their foot in here, which is a pretty good trick to do, if you look at where the driver's seat is, you know, you're not going to step your foot right here trying to get in. But it does need to be protected, but it also needs to breathe. So I'm going to see if I can go whip up a mount for this thing that can allow it to sit there. Okay, today's lesson is in thinking ahead. I made this cool little bracket with these zippity-doo-dah speed holes to support the ECU, and it's got the step up so that the 1/2-inch spacers, all this great stuff. And then as I was going to fit it in the car, I realized that these cool little speed holes hang down just enough to actually completely hit the floor, which means most of the back of the ECU is not vented, and I got no airflow, and I want some airflow. So I didn't think about the fact that this was going to take up dimension. So this is a non-starter. And so I'm going to make a different bracket. I am going to put the how I made this at the end. I think I should start a bloopers reel. Everything I screw up, I'll put at the end of the video if you want to watch that. So wait till everything's over and you'll see how I made this. But for now, here's the new design. And so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that right now. Right, I prepped the panel. I just hit it with a DA to smooth it all out, cleaned up the backside. It's going to get powder coated anyway. So now to do the bending. Always important to remember which way to bend. So since I want this to go this way and then this way, this side has to be bent down, which means it goes in upside down. And I'll just bend this one. And I'm just going to go to a 45. This has got a little sliding scale reader over here, so I'm going to go just a little bit past 45. And then put the whole part in this way. And back up to a little over 45, basically. And you can tweak. This is so soft, I can tweak it later if I miss by a couple degrees. Release it, and there's the step up. Right, so same thing on this side. And there's the bracket. Alright, the support brace is all set up and weld through, primered around, underneath, behind. The plug weld holes are drilled, so I'm just going to go ahead and get this section plug welded in all the way around. That went in nicely, and I just knocked down the welds a little bit. Now I'm just gonna make up a little corner piece here to close that all off. And I just need to get some measurements on this. And then obviously I gotta do the same thing on this side. Actually, I think I shall start with this one. It's a little easier to get to. Run over to the bandsaw, and then just a little piece bent. I wanted to plug weld it down to the ground, or to the floor, and I'm just gonna do that. And then I'll drill a couple holes here, plug weld it to the floor there, seam weld it up here and in here and across the top, and that'll close off that side. And then just a little bit of tidying up, and I just decided, because I want to move on to a couple other things right now, I'm going to put a little gusset right in here, so I taped that off before I squirted the primer, and then I still have that corner to close up. But that's sort of how it's going to look, and it's going to work out great. And rather than bore you with, again, cutting, grinding, welding, I filled in this piece, squirted it all. I can always come back and add a rib here if I decide I need to. And I don't think I'm going to need to. I mean, this thing is not going anywhere. And really, all it does is support this. And yes, it's bracing for the floor, but this is way, way, way stronger than what was in here before, which is just this box tube. So, there you go. The ECU is going to go about there. Wires are going to run under here. They run under this, and this does not interfere with the wires. This is the seat tilt, right? So this is how the seat tilts. There's this little lever. And so that takes care of this for now. And I think I'm going to do pass-throughs for my bulkhead connectors right here in the firewall, because you can see with that seat, there's room for the harness to sneak up this way and then just do a 90 into a booted connector here. So I think this is where this is going to go. And I've gotten some of the fuel system stuff, and what I'm realizing, I was planning to do this anyway, but what I'm going to do is open up an access panel here like I have in the LS car. It makes it really handy to get at things, like I need to have a fuel rail or a fuel line split to go to the different fuel rails, and just being able to get in there and put some of the hardware, get the wiring, you know, connected to the things that are in that area. It just makes it a million times easier to do. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a panel there. And you can see the parts car over there still has its firewall. So I'm going to slice out a section of that firewall, and it'll serve as the cover panel for this opening. One access panel. And I always like to trim away from the line. I can come back and tidy that up better than taking too much. But now you can see why I wanted to do that. You know, I'll have fuel lines coming up here. I'll have the splitter. I have to have a pressure regulator. You know, all this kind of stuff I want to get to. And I'd love to have it right here. You know, probably make some kind of mount for everything. But you can just see, I mean, woo, there's the motor. It's so cool. Anyway, access panel. All right. There it is, the access panel hole opening, and it's all tidied up, and the edges are smooth, and the corners are all where I wanted them, and all that good stuff. Turns out that the parts car, the firewall, what was left of it, isn't long enough, so I'm just going to have to make a panel to cover that, which is fine. It gives me a chance to do something kind of cool, maybe. And then one last thing I want to show you before we wrap up this episode. I've got some goodies for next time. I ended up going with some Radium Engineering components. This is the fuel pressure regulator and pressure gauge, and man alive is this stuff lovely. It is absolutely beautiful stuff. So I'm looking forward to working with that. You can see I got a bunch of fuel line parts here. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to redo the fuel lines, and I moved away from the aluminum, and this is 028 wall stainless steel. So you can see you're going to have to weld on some stainless fittings. And I'll tell you what, having worked with that aluminum stuff, you can just bend it by hand, no problem. This stuff is way harder to bend. So this will be an interesting one. So that'll be for next time. And there you go. So that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a comment, like, subscribe, all that great stuff. And we'll see you again real soon. Everybody take care now. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to make this mount, and I'm going to do something just a little bit different this time. And so, pretty simple little drawing, shape, some holes. Got a scrap piece of aluminum I'm going to use to make it, so let me plasma cut this thing. All right, we've got a little background noise there with the fan from the welder. Martin's welding in the Mini. But what I did was I cut this panel, and what you saw me doing was drilling some large holes for this mandrel that's on this Harbor Freight hydraulic pump press. It's sort of a reverse press. It actually pulls the cylinder down into here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to make some dimple dies in this thing. This is the Swag Off-Road dimple die set. And in order to cut the hole big enough for this thing, use what's called a knockout punch. And that's what this is. It's just a nice cutter. And so I am going to cut this, knock this out here. And these just screw down on here. And then I don't even take this thing out of the box. It's just convenient to. And it goes through aluminum like butter. And just like that, you've got a hole. So pop this out, take out the slug, cut the next hole. Okay, and now with these cut, I could go ahead and make the dimple die. But what I'm first going to do is, remember, this is going to be a step up at the edge. And with the dimple die in there, I may not be able to get this end of the brake the way I want it. So I'm going to go bend these corners the way I want them bent. And then I'll come back and do the dimple die. You don't need to see me. I want to see the action. So it turns out that the step that I want to have here, I want to bend this back out, and my brake doesn't have the reach, this shorter reach, so I'm going to have to do this manually. So I figured I'd go ahead and just do the dimple dies now. The other thing that's important to remember is which direction you're pushing these things. So I want to push them down into the bracket. So, whoops, I think I need to take that off. So this goes on, then this goes on, then this goes on. And now all you have to do is grab something with threads, and I'll just use one of the knockout punches to thread that on there. And we'll go ahead and dimple this thing. Now what you're going to see is, I'm going to step around here to work the pump, but as I'm pumping, you'll see if I can get the angle. What? Oh boy, there goes deformation. Look at that, that's horrible. It's deforming, it's deforming, it's deforming. But when you get to the very end, look what happens when it starts to get into the flat part of the die. The beauty part about this is it just smashes that thing right back to level. So I just go all the way flat, release the pump, and we have one speed hole. And I'll clean this all up, but right, it stiffens the panel up. Like, look at this, super flexy on this end. If I try to do that down here, it doesn't move at all because of that section. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish up these other two.